Welcome to the home of Grand Canyon hiking. This is the Grand Canyon Hiker Dude Show presented by Bright Angel Outfitters for canyon and rim-to-rim specific gear and apparel and tons of free resources to help you plan your adventure. Visit us at brightangeloutfitters.com. We exist to help you hike your best hike. Now, let's talk some canyon. Well, he became so enamored with the Grand Canyon that he wrote a book on it. I'm Brian Special, and this is the Grand Canyon Hiker Dude Show presented by Bright Angel Outfitters. All right, I'll be the first to admit that growing up with the last name Special was sometimes challenging because, well, you know how kids are. So it kind of makes me feel like I have license to make light of others who face similar challenges, which brings us to today's guest. His name is Davy Crockett. Yeah, though he grew up in Texas going by David, somewhere along the line as he got older, Davy figured out what I did. It's best to lean into your name, especially when it's hard to forget. So, Davy Crockett it is. Now 66 and living near Salt Lake City, Davy has logged well over 1,000 miles below the rim and is a well-known figure in the ultramarathon community. 2 years ago, he put his love of the canyon on paper and authored a book called Grand Canyon Rim-to-Rim History, which you can now find on Amazon. In it, stories and tidbits and vast amounts of information on the running and hiking history of the Inner Canyon, something Davy believes we should all have some knowledge of as we make our own footprints on these sacred trails. This is the Grand Canyon Hiker Dude Show presented by Bright Angel Outfitters. Okay, Davy, the book is phenomenal. It is a treasure trove of information, and it is an absolute gift to the Grand Canyon, not just the hiking community, but just the Grand Canyon community as a whole. It is so full of information. I read something like that, and I wonder how in the world someone could put something that in depth with that much nuance and that much research together. So did you have a history in writing books before, and what inspired you to take on a project like that?
I did. In the 90s, I wrote several books on the American westward migration, specifically to Utah, where I live now. And so I got involved in that. But professionally, I was in technology and deep into search technology. So I've learned over the years how to search pretty well, especially newspapers. And so this Grand Canyon rim-to-rim history, it's a little bit different because it's based mostly on newspaper articles that were published even more than 100 years ago. So it presents the Grand Canyon experience kind of in the words of the people who came there and visited, what they saw, what the trails were like, and it's just full of stories. And that's what really attracted to me to write the book.
How did the idea to do the Grand Canyon specifically come up?
Well, I became an ultra runner in 2005, and immediately I became attracted to the idea of running across the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim. And I did that in 2005. It was my first experience going down into the Grand Canyon. And it was such a life-changing experience to do that, and left a deep impression on me. And at the time, I had a blog, and so I always would write about my adventures, especially in the Grand Canyon. And before I knew it, I was addicted to the canyon, and I've run or hiked over 1,000 miles down into the Grand Canyon, and done some crazy rim to rims that nobody else has ever done before. For example, going from the North Rim to the Grandview trailhead and back, which is over 80 miles. And I did that twice. And I've gone from the North Rim to Hermit's Rest and back. So making use of the Tonto Trail. And then I did a quad crossing one time when only about 6 of us had done it. And so the Grand Canyon was anytime I had an opportunity to go down there, I would take that opportunity. But after a while, I just, I researched more and wanted to. Well, what disturbed me, this is what disturbed me, is I became involved in various discussion groups with hikers of the Grand Canyon, and I noticed that they pretty much despised runners in the Grand Canyon, and that's kind of typical. And as I listened and learned, and I realized that, yeah, the running community was being a problem. Many of them were treating the Grand Canyon as I'd call it as a Disneyland ride, just something to go, do, have fun, and go home, without really understanding the huge history behind the trails that they've run on, the people who lost their lives in making those trails. And as I researched more and more, that's when I thought, boy, I've got to educate the community on what this history is in the Grand Canyon. It isn't just a trail that goes across the Grand Canyon and back. There's so many things along the way that are important to see and important to reflect on.
Let's go back to that first R3 that you did, because obviously something got in you, and you were already an ultra runner. I'm sure you've been to many places, many incredible places all around the world. What was it that you remember specifically about how the canyon just kind of grabbed you and drew you in, and now has held on to you for this long?
Well, first thing is I generally run solo. So for me, it isn't a group fun kind of thing. When I go down into the canyon, it's a kind of almost a spiritual experience to be down there and listen to the silence and watch the sunrise and so forth. But that first time, I'd never done it. I didn't know what to expect. I did very little research. I had a friend who had done it, and he assured me that I can't get lost and just go and do it. And I did it in mid-May, I remember. But it was a very unusual year because there was still about 3 feet of snow at the North Rim. So I just remember I started in the dark and got down to Phantom Ranch probably in an hour and a half or less, and was just thrilled at that experience, going down to that famous place, even in the dark, and then spending the whole day, going up to North Rim and back, and had to cross some creeks that were really running fast because of the high water coming down from the North Rim. And I'd never seen roaring springs just gush out of so many caves. It's just incredible what I saw there. And then, I got close to the North Rim. There's only about an inch or so on the trail, but I popped up at the top, and lo and behold, there were several feet of snow. And I was in shorts, and they were getting ready to open the North Rim. I saw the truck go by at the trailhead. He probably look at me, seeing me in shorts, wondering, what is that guy doing? But then I ran back, and just was a thrilling experience to be able to do it. I think that day I didn't see anybody else do it, and so that's how unusual it was back in 2005 when I started.
And you obviously became fascinated by learning more about the trails that you were running and the corridor trails at that point. Our audience, mostly rim-to-rimmers, not many
Right.
runners, but certainly there are runners and those that aspire to do rim-to-rim hiking amongst our audience as well. And I know you've said that you think that anyone who takes on these trips on the corridor trails, whether it be a hike or whether it be a run, you think it's important that people understand the history of the trails they are traversing, because they are absolute marvels. Why is that so important to you?
Well, because they just didn't happen to show up by magic. And the national park didn't create, at least the first one, the Bright Angel Trail. The Bright Angel Trail was first used by indigenous people making their way down to Indian Garden, now called Havasupai Gardens. And then so it was very rough. It was a route back then. But then a guy named Ralph Cameron, who became very influential at the canyon, was interested in mining. So the Bright Angel Trail down to Indian Garden was really for prospectors and to start the mining there. But and the trail, most people don't know it's moved over time. The original trailhead was at the Kolb Studio, which is still there right on the rim, and they used to take pictures of you before you went down into the canyon, mostly on mule back then. I used to joke. I remember I read somebody said, "Why do they take pictures?" And a guide joked, "Well, so we can identify the bodies." People were kind of scared about going down there. But so that original Bright Angel Trail wasn't that long switchback in those tunnels that we go through today. It started right at the Kolb Studio and went straight down that little side canyon and did little switchbacks down to Indian Garden.
And it's changed below Havasupai Gardens now as well, because I know the original Devil's Corkscrew is not the Devil's Corkscrew that's so famous today.
That's right. You wouldn't follow, the trail didn't follow the Garden Creek there after Indian Garden. What it did is you went on the Tonto Trail and headed east on the Tonto Trail until you got to the next major drainage. And if you go on the Tonto Trail there, you should do that even if you're not going to do many miles on it. Actually, today you have to because the lower trail is closed for the pipeline. But if you do that, if you look down there, you'll see the old telephone poles that were created in 1920s, 1930s, and that's where the original Devil's Corkscrew went down. It was quite steep, really hard. They had to dismount the mules and horses as they went down there, and the switchbacks would always erode and had a problem. But that's the way you'd go down. But what people don't understand is that's not the way they would use to go to Phantom Ranch, because you could continue on down the Bright Angel Trail, but once you got to the river, that's it. There's a dead end. There was no Silver Bridge. There was no river trail along the river to get you to a bridge. That was the dead end. And so the way you would get to Phantom Ranch is the way people probably are using it today. You continue on the Tonto Trail all the way to Tip-Off and then go down. They called it the Cable Trail because there was a cable tram that helped you get across the river back before 1920. And it was a pretty rough trail, but it was, and you can still, if you look, you can still see outlines of the old switchbacks for the cable trail before the South Kaibab Trail was built. But,
so correct me if I'm wrong, Davy. I'm trying to visually put this together. So I think what you're saying is that the entirety of Lower Bright Angel is different today than it was originally. You're saying that we would have gone at the Tano Junction and started ahead, on the Tano Trail toward what would become South Kaibab, and then veer off to the left and go down a drainage, which was Devil's Corkscrew. And so then the trail would obviously meander in a different direction because there was no river trail for it to hook up to, like at Pipe Creek or the River Rest House.
Yeah. So if you continue down the Devil's Corkscrew today, if you know where it comes out of that canyon, it would cross the modern trail and keep going down very steeply with switchbacks to the Pipe Canyon, and then you'd follow Pipe Canyon, Pipe Creek all the way to the river, and that's the way Bright Angel Trail was. But it ended upriver then, from where
it ended at the Silver river. Bridge is now. Okay.
Right.
Is it still possible to find and follow that trail? Can you still see the remnants of it?
It is, but it's of course, with rock slides and all that, it's but that's something I haven't done yet. I know others have, and I have no idea if the rangers like that or not. But I look at it all the time, but it would be kind of nice to go see it And so in my book, I have lots of little stories about people who were terrified, going down Devil's Corkscrew, and how difficult that lower trail was, because back in the early days, early 1900s, they'd usually just go to Indian Garden and come back. But then, little by little, they started going all the way to the river.
So when was it that, I mean, Bright Angel technically ends at River Rest House and Pipe
Right.
Creek. That's technically where it is, but I think everyone pretty much, it's interchangeable to call the Bright Angel Trail the River Trail all the way to Silver Bridge.
Right.
But that river trail, that mile stretch between River Rest House and the and Silver Bridge, when was that completed? And when did that all? That completed the entire Bright Angel / River Trail that finally connected it. When?
Yeah, so that was in the early 1930s, and that was done by the Civilian Conservation Corps, and those were young men, and they established a camp for these. And so it was during the Depression when they'd hire young men to do various projects all over the country, and so the most remote camp in the country was down across from Phantom Ranch, where today the Bright Angel campground is. And so they had a whole army camp there. And so they spent, I think, almost 2 years blasting. And you can see it, the way that river trail is constructed. They had to do lots of blasting to make that trail. And so it was very dangerous and had injuries and even a death. And so, but yeah, that became a big deal to have that connector trail there.
And at the time, it connected with South Kaibab, so you could cross the Black Bridge. Now, that section of the river trail between Silver Bridge and Black Bridge, to me, is one of the most unappreciated stretches of trail anywhere that I've seen in the canyon, because you stand across from that on the other side of the river, and you look up at that wall between the bridges, and you can't even really make out that there's a trail up there. And we're talking about just a jagged cliff face. So for them to construct that back in the day, in the 30s, out of that rock is just, even to today, what an engineering marvel.
Yeah, a lot of dynamite. And you need to understand that the Silver Bridge didn't get constructed until the early 1970s. So they would use that, and then South Kaibab wasn't completed coming down from Yaqui Point. That didn't happen until about the mid-20s, 1925, and that was constructed because the Bright Angel Trail up to that point was a toll trail. So this Ralph Cameron and then others would charge people, even hikers. There was a toll booth right at Bright Angel Trail.
Like $1. They called it a toll road at the time.
Yeah, it was a toll road.
Can you imagine?
And so it drove the park. Once the park came into play in 1919, they despised the whole thing, and it took them years to get rid of Cameron. So what they did is create the South Kaibab as an alternative that would be free and wouldn't have because they were making a lot of money off of that trail. They really were.
Isn't it? That is one of my favorite ironies of this, of anything that's ever happened in the canyon. Ralph Cameron, who you mentioned, just despised by the Park Service because when the Park Service took it over in 1919, Cameron kept control of Bright Angel, and so there was no easy, free way for anyone to get from Grand Canyon Village to the river. And so the Park Service gets so fed up with Cameron that they look for another place to build a trail, and they pick what I think is maybe the most iconic landscape in the world to build a trail, and that only for that reason. You could call it greed, you could call it entrepreneurship, however you want to look at Ralph Cameron, but he really is the father of the South Kaibab Trail, isn't he?
Yeah, well, the influencer. But he was definitely the father of like Indian Garden. He had a whole resort down there. They had you could stay overnight, had tents, and had had waiters feed them meals, and it was quite the place that he did there. He eventually abandoned it, and then it became kind of a trash heap for many years until the park finally cleaned that out. So I mean, Cameron did many great things, but he was a sore thorn. And even when they finally got rid of him, he became he became a senator for Arizona, and he became a enemy of the national park. He tried to pull funding away from the park, but he did great things. He's buried in the Grand Canyon Pioneer Cemetery there on the South Rim.
Are you in our Grand Canyon Hiker Dude Show Facebook group yet? Well, join today and learn all the tips and tricks and hear about others' experiences on Rim to Rim and beyond. It's totally free. You'll have daily access to me, Coach Arnie, and just about every guest we've ever had on the show. All there to help you have your best possible Grand Canyon experience. Join the Grand Canyon Hiker Dude Show Facebook group and be inspired and informed and get yourself Grand Canyon ready. The beautiful thing, Davy, I mean, South Kaibab is just an incredible experience. But building that Kaibab suspension bridge, which would later be known as Black Bridge simply as it is today, talk about another engineering marvel, right?
Yeah, but before then, there were two other iterations of that. The first was a crazy cable tram that, if you really look closely, you can still I've been told there's still some remnants of some things there, but it was a cable that went across with a car, a cage that hung under the cable, and they usually have to have an operator kind of pull it manually, the cage across. They tried getting an engine, but that thing seemed to break down all the time. So that became a problem because if the operator wasn't there, it became impossible to get across the river unless you had a boat. And even Theodore Roosevelt in, I think it was 1913, went rim to rim with his sons to go hunt mountain lions in the North Rim. And when he got down there, there was no operator there. So if you can picture this, so a big Theodore Roosevelt, cattleman was on the other side, but he didn't know how to operate the cable tram very good. So Roosevelt got frustrated how slow it was going. So Roosevelt just took over and used his strength and got it over. But after a while, that it's hard to maintain, and there was a lot of problems with it. But they built the next bridge was called the Swinging Suspension Bridge. This was before the Black Bridge, and it was in the early 20s. And this bridge, so this was the first way that once they created Phantom Ranch that you could get over to the ranch, and have a mule come over on the train. But the crazy suspension bridge swung. So, in fact, if it was high wind, you couldn't use it. It was way too dangerous. And there were a couple instances where the bridge even turned completely over, upside down, because of the high wind. So that was really bad. So they learned that lesson. And so when it was around 1925, when they were working on the South Kaibab Bridge, they decided, we got to have a decent bridge now. And that's when Black Bridge was created. And what was kind of cool is they had both bridges in place for a little while. And I have a picture in my book about that. The Swinging Suspension Bridge was below where the Black Bridge today is. So there was no tunnel there yet. So the way you use the Swinging Suspension Bridge, and you can see it today, you kind of go around that cliff, and then the Swinging Suspension Bridge was quite lower towards the river.
And building Black Bridge, we're going to talk about engineering marvels over and over again when it comes to building trails in one of the most rugged landscapes anywhere in the world. Look up at those giant 500-foot long cables next time you cross the Black Bridge and realize where those came from.
Yeah, and they were quite a thing to get down. What they eventually did is hired Havasupai Native Americans to bring it down South Kaibab to put in place. But they
All
also
in one
used,
piece.
yeah. But they also used the swinging suspension bridge, which was already in place. That helped them actually, put the new bridge in place.
There was an interesting tidbit in your book. And again, everyone, the book is called Grand Canyon Rim to Rim History by Davy Crockett. You can find it on Amazon. Could not recommend it more. It's one of those things you're going to go back to over and over again and pick up new things every time you read it, like I did recently. And one thing you said about the Black Bridge that I didn't pick up the first time and found this little tidbit is that it's 5 feet wide, and they made it the width that it is so that the mules could not turn around. I thought that was pretty interesting because
That's right. You don't
not
want
the
them.
most easy thing probably to get mules to go across a bridge that's hanging over a roaring river, so to speak.
And they learned that from the swinging suspension bridge too, because some of those mules would just
I
get
bet.
terrified on that thing, and horses too. They used horses a lot back then.
So that leads us to North Kaibab, which was the final of the 3 corridor trails to be built. But I say that knowing that before North Kaibab was built, that does not mean that people were not traversing between the bottom of the canyon and the North Rim, correct?
Right. As early as early 1900s, 1903, I think, there were accounts of people making the complete crossing, and most of them were prospectors and hunters, I would say. There were lots of mountain lions on the North Rim, and a great attraction to go over there. But the way they did that is, if you can picture this, you just go. There was no real trail. I mean, they tried to make a trail. Let's put it that way. In some sections, but going through the box, and no, there was not a nice trail up on the cliffs there. And so what a lot of people did when they made the rim to rim, they would count how many Bright Angel Creek crossings they would do. And most, I think, I found was 96 crossings, if you can believe that, that they would make. And, and sometimes, you're talking good up to your knees and rolling rocks and trying to bring horses through there. It was quite a thing. And then when you got over near what we call Manzanita rest area today, it didn't take a turn there to the left to go up Roaring Spring Canyon. Instead, it continued, and you can still see the trail. If you look to the right when you're there, you'll see a trail. Some people still try to go up a little ways, and a few people go all the way, but it really went straight up. Bright Angel Canyon continued, some really rough switchbacks. Today it's very overgrown. If you're daring and try it, you better wear long pants because it's quite hard to go through. But that's the way they would do it, and they would even. It was so steep in places they would describe that their horses or mules coming back down from it would slide on their haunches down, and they of course lost some animals that would fall off cliffs, and so it was a rough thing. And so it was in the late 1920s when they finally put together and blasted and used lots of engineers and made the North Kaibab Trail, and they also at the same time constructed the North Rim Lodge. Was also created at that time.
I was going to say 1928. So 2028 is going to be quite the year. 3 years.
Yeah, you
from
would
now.
think. I wonder if the canyons.
We are going to have centennial celebrations to choose from amongst Grand Canyon Lodge, which opened in 1928, North Kaibab, which opened in 1928, and also Black Bridge, which opened in 1928. So this is going to be quite a celebration in a few years, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm now the vice president of the Grand Canyon Historical Society.
You better get going.
Put in that. So, but yeah, I got to remind them about those centennial things that we should do something that would recognize these great feats that were put together.
So they did. So the Park Service finally decides that they do need to have a more maintained trail and they decided to build North Kaibab. It opens in 1928. That's another one. Every time I'm on it, I think I see something new, and it's just kind of mind blowing to realize that that someone carved a trail out of the side of this rock for that long stretch after Redwall Bridge when you're on the way down. How in the heck do they do these things, especially close to 100 years ago?
Yeah, I found newspaper articles where people were doubting that it was possible when
You look at it today and you wonder the same thing. No, you couldn't do that.
But that trail has always been a big trouble point, though, because almost every year get pretty bad rock slides. After that bridge as you're going up to North Rim, some massive rock slides just occur depending on how much snow you get or how much rain. That really shuts down. Sometimes North Kaibab has had to be shut down for multiple months for them to do trail work to get it back into shape. So when I go across that area, a lot of times, especially early, if you try a rim to rim in April, usually you'll have to cross some areas that have been kind of washed out during the winter.
Were there any deaths, injuries when they built that section of the trail, and how long did that take?
That one, I'm amazed that they got that down in a couple years, if I remember right.
That's incredible.
Now, the deaths occurred because of putting in the pipeline. At the South Rim, there's no water. When the rain, there's no wells, so when it rains up there, it just falls into cracks in the earth and falls into the canyon. So over the years, they've really needed water for the South Rim, and so it was in the 1960s that they really put it in a good pipeline that went from Roaring Springs, which has a ton of water, and piped that all the way. So by gravity, it would then flow all the way to Indian Garden, and then they would have a pumping station at Indian Garden to get it up to the top. But as they constructed that pipe and improved the North Kaibab Trail, there were at least 7 deaths from helicopter pilots that would daily they'd be buzzing and bringing materials down, and they would have some pretty sad accidents at times. So there were some. I try to remember in my book. I give you names and show you their graves that help you remember who these people were that created this pipeline that now we're trying to replace.
Yeah, here in 2025, we're nearing hopefully close to the end stages of getting this project that's disrupted traffic on the canyon trails, hopefully bringing that to a close. But I think it is important, to your point about recognizing the history of the trails and knowing that. I think it's equally important to recognize the marvel that is the Trans-Canyon pipeline, and the fact that if you look at Roaring Springs when you're hiking up or down North Kaibab, and to realize that the water from there is being pumped to the North Rim to provide all the drinking water that you use, all the water you use, period, on the North Rim, and it's also being pumped all the way across the canyon. To your point, Davy, gravity fed all the way down through Phantom Ranch, across the Silver Bridge, and then all the way up to Havasupai Gardens before it is pumped to the South Rim. So every drop of water that you use on the South Rim in your showers, drinking water in restaurants, is from Roaring Springs, and that is simply unbelievable.
Yeah, and when you look up at Roaring Springs, if you look carefully, you'll see gates where the springs are coming over. What most people don't understand is there are some pretty massive caves in there that have created by water, and goes in at least a mile in those caves. They explored them. They found them in the 1930s, I think, and explored them. But of course, they had to seal them off or close them, so crazy people like us wouldn't try to climb up there and go in those caves. But they have to maintain it. They have to go in there. There's dams in there inside, to kind of collect the water and send it down into pipes that then can be used for the water. And then it's treated, at least has been by the pumping station down below Roaring Springs. And what a lot of people are forgetting, not knowing, is that we call it the Manzanita Rest Station or rest area, but for 30 years it was the home of Bruce Aiken, who raised his family, his children, down in the Grand Canyon. They would play in all the creeks and climb the cliffs and so forth. So I have a complete long chapter about the Aikens, who lived down in the Grand Canyon. And I never call it Manzanita. I always call it the Aikens house, in memory of him. And he lives in Flagstaff, and was an artist that for years would paint the Grand Canyon as he lived down there and operated the pump station.
Yeah, incredible story. Imagine raising your family in the Grand Canyon, and I know you tell some great stories about the Aikens. That is a one of a kind experience, to say the least. So we've talked about the trails. Now let's talk about rim to rim. Canyon hiking can be hot and deadly, and shade can save your life. Be sure to plan your hike with our Grand Canyon Shade Tracker, a completely free tool that lets you see exactly where you'll have shade on your route every minute of every day of the year. Find the Grand Canyon Shade Tracker exclusively at brightangeloutfitters.com and hike your best hike. Hiking rim to rim. Now it's possible on maintained trails. When did rim to rim become what it is today, which is a bucket list adventure for people all around the world?
I think it became, it was in the 1960s that, forget its name, a runner from Australia came, and he was a self-promoter. So he would do long runs in Death Valley, and then he came to do the Grand Canyon, and then he would get his adventure put in newspapers all over the country. And so once you do that, other people are going to, of course, say, hey, I gotta go try that too. I bet I can do it faster, and so forth. And so it was in the 1960s probably that it got going. But even before that, and I have a kind of a big section about that, there was a man in from Tucson called Charlie Thornton, and he worked at the school for the deaf and blind in Tucson. And what he did in the late 1950s is decided to bring blind boys to experience a rim to rim. And so they were really the first in the 1950s, the first ones to think about it doing in the day, in one day, because most of them before then would camp out, one or two nights along the way. But he showed that even blind boys could do it all in one day, and he did that for quite a few years, and so that was put in papers all over the country too.
And these kids, when they were doing these crossings, you said in the book, we're talking about 12-hour rim to rims with kids who are completely blind and their guides. That is truly remarkable.
Yeah, they used ropes. At least when going downhill was important for them to use ropes. But going uphill, they'd usually put their hands on the shoulders of a sighted person ahead of them, and they were just thrilled. It was just an important part of their life, and they wanted to do it and repeat it each year.
And Charlie Thornton, who led these boys time and time again, and believed so strongly in physical fitness and at the blind school that he taught at, he became kind of a legend in the canyon. You wrote in the book about he was the first one that I guess we know of. Well, he set the fastest known time at the time in the 60s. At the age of 52, when he did rim to rim to rim on Memorial Day in 15 hours and 55 minutes. And I love what he said and what you wrote, because it really captures what we all still say to this day when we're doing rim to rim to rim. He said that on that run, he said to himself 1,000 times over, I would never try it again. Right? Don't we all say that now, Davey?
Especially if we do it during a hot period of time.
Yeah, that's for sure.
People suffer when they do that.
But Mr. Thornton said 15 hours and 55 minutes, which is kind of a poetic time because all these years later, the record is exactly 10 hours faster set by Jim Walmsley in 2016. So it was 15:55. Jim Walmsley, and I talk about this often on the podcast and in our Facebook group because I truly believe, Davey, and I wonder what your take is on Jim Walmsley. But the fact that someone could do a double crossing of the Grand Canyon from South Kaibab to North Kaibab and then back to South Kaibab again, 10 hours faster than that 15:55, 5 hours and 55 minutes to complete a double crossing of the canyon. To me, as a huge sports fan, as a fan of sports history and records, to me, that is truly one of the greatest athletic achievements that I have ever heard of because it's so unfathomable if you have done rim to rim. To put into context what he accomplished, sub 6 hours. What is your opinion on that, and how is that record looked at in the ultra running community?
Oh, it is iconic, and it's inconceivable, and it's hard to imagine. My fastest time for a rim to rim is just over 5 hours, and I thought that was pretty fast.
That's moving, yes.
But for him to do both in under 6 hours, it takes. It takes a special talent. You've got to be a very accomplished trail runner with balance and stride and all those things where you don't have the fear that you're going to trip and fall off a cliff or anything like that. But how fast he was going is just amazing. I mean, I've always loved to run down from the North Rim to Phantom Ranch because that's much more runnable than the trails down from the South Rim. And I've tried to push those pretty hard, but every now and then I trip. And so it's amazing what he and others before him have done. So I try in the book, I have kind of a progression list of the fastest known times of those who were really pushing it over the years.
And I know that record, ultra running is so popular now, and it seems to be getting more and more popular. And so people are starting to take runs at that record, it seems more and more, and are having good days in the canyon and still falling 15, 20 minutes short of it and saying, well, Jim's record is pretty stout. How long do you think it will be before that record is challenged? And will it be by Walmsley again?
Probably not Walmsley. We'll see. I think he put it up there so well. It probably is one of the greatest records that'll be hard to beat, but you never know. It is pretty incredible, and Jim Walmsley is one of the greatest ultra runners of all time. Could be the greatest. So it takes somebody pretty good, and you got to be a trail runner. Some of the really fast ultra runners are really fast on roads and tracks. And so you'd have to get somebody like Jim, who's won Western States 100 so many times, who has such the speed on trails. And these aren't just, when you compare these trails to others, this is more rugged. I mean, you've got to be able to have the skill, such like in the Wasatch Mountains and so forth, where there's a lot of rocks and things that have obstacles for you to go. Because you got to be careful coming down that trail. It's not smooth at times, and stepping in the mule pee all the way, it's kind of gross too.
Yeah, it certainly can be. So, I'm just curious, knowing the history that you do of rim to rim and rim to rim to rim, and even crossings beyond that, is rim to rim. Do you think it's gotten to the point where it's putting too much of a strain because it's so popular? So it's putting too much of a strain on the infrastructure of the canyon. Do you think it's a problem? Because I hear that often, that it's like there's too many people doing it now, and on weekends in October when the north side's about to close, in May when it's an opening weekend, the trails are just clogged. It can be like a freeway. Is there too much going on right now? Do you think the Park Service will ever have to put some kind of a cap on it?
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, they've ever since, even from the '60s on, they were very concerned about the overuse of the canyon trails, and they had to put on reservations for campgrounds. I mean, there was one Easter weekend. I think there were 1,000 people once camping around Phantom Ranch, if you can imagine that. And so they've had to put in place various things over the years, lotteries and so forth. And at times I think they have considered doing something, making rim to rims register. Or I don't know. I hope not, and that's why I hope, especially runners, have a greater respect for the canyon. And I really encourage people, if you're going to do it, don't go on a weekend. try to manage your trip so you can do it on a weekday when there'll be fewer. Because the times I've done it on those weekends, the last time I remember, I think I did do it on the opening May day. And I was just stunned. So this is still about 4 or 5 years ago. I was just stunned that it seemed like I was experiencing it on the freeway, that there were people both passing me and hundreds and hundreds of people coming at me during it. So it makes it a very strange experience, I'd say. And that's why after I'd done about 10 rim to rims, I said, I'm getting off this trail. And that's when I started going very remotely. I had the experience and the confidence that I could go on the Tonto Trail and experience the canyon in peace and quiet, away from the mules, away from the crowds. And it's a great thing to do if you have the skills and experience, because you can get in trouble. If there's not a lot of people out there to save you if you get in trouble.
I want to go back to something as we wrap up here, that you talked about in the beginning, and that is trail runners and hikers and how they are interacting these days. And you talk about the experience of it feeling like a freeway out there. I experienced that back in October, I think, of last year, when it was just trail runner palooza out there. And it became a great frustration to me. And I'm not here to lecture anyone. I'm just sharing my experience and my perspective on this personally. But I do feel like trail runners it seems they get so wrapped up in themselves and what they're doing that etiquette just goes out the window. They're more important. What you're doing is not as important. Even to the point, Davy, where I would start counting the number of people who would even look up and say hello, and just be friendly, because that goes so far. We're all in this together. Let's just be friendly and practice, good etiquette. Right? Practice the rules that are established, the unwritten rules of up has right away, and, simple things like that. And just being kind and saying hello. And I was running into it over and over again, just the gruff, almost disdain that it seemed like trail runners were having toward hikers. And I think you even say it in the book, that it's really an etiquette issue more than anything that's creating the problem. And if everyone could just be a little friendlier and a little nicer to each other, and maybe a little more self-aware that other people are out there, that we wouldn't have these problems.
Yeah, and one thing I learned very early on is the etiquette rules for trail runners and backpackers are reversed. You mentioned uphill having the right of way. Well, in trail races, downhill has the right of way. And so a lot of these runners are really not trying to be, mean or rude. They're going by what they understand, and they expect that they're running towards somebody that person will step off. So there is some of that. So you have to. But you're right, and that's why my book's so important for them to read, is that the experience isn't just some Disneyland ride, that your experience history and the beauty that is along the way. Now, I really disagree with backpackers or hikers who say that there should be, like, you can't enjoy the canyon at a fast speed. That's totally ridiculous. You can enjoy at a crawl, or you can enjoy it at a fast speed. And so, but you need to be courteous and realize that you're sharing the trail with others.
Yeah, hike your own hike. We say it all the time. And that hike your own hike, run your own run, you're exactly right. Some people are in it for different reasons. People are in it for setting their times. Personally, they're in it for just enjoying the meander through the canyon. They're in it for the scenery. You can experience all those things, and there's no sense in judging each other and why you're there. And yes, if you are running through the canyon, you are enjoying the canyon just like someone who's plodding through the canyon. It's an incredible, magical place to be, and you sum up everything so amazingly in this book, Davy. Again, Grand Canyon Rim to Rim History by Davy Crockett. Easy to remember. Find that on Amazon. I promise you, this is a book you will not want to put down. And when you finally do, you're going to go back to it over and over again. It is a gift to the Grand Canyon community. And I hope you'll go out and check it out for yourself. And Davy, thank you for doing it. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights with us here today and all of your knowledge. And I hope we do it again because this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's been special to be.
See, I give you grief for your name and you throw it right back at me. I love it. That's how it should be. Davy, thank you so much, my friend.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines from the book comes from an early hiker on the just completed trails who said, quote, "The trail is broad, safe, and the work of engineering genius." Yes, so true. And we owe a significant debt of gratitude for those who blaze the paths we now enjoy. Again, the book is Grand Canyon Rim to Rim History by Davy Crockett, and you can find it on Amazon. Well worth adding to your collection. Davy also has a podcast that you should check out. It's called Ultra Running History, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Again, Ultra Running History by Davy Crockett. Now, Davy's also one of the few to have completed a quadruple crossing, the same trek Coach Arnie finished for the second time last November. And today, Coach is back to talk about the science of walking.
Building on what we talked about in our last tip with the feet, the plantar fasciitis prevention, is how are we supposed to walk? I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly. And let me back up for a second. A lot of people refer to me as a movement specialist. As an exercise physiologist, I have kind of swerved into this lane, not just for other people, but mainly for myself, because a lot of times we may be in a pattern that we think works for us, but in time we find little niggles that are bothering us because we've been walking in the wrong pattern, and it sometimes is too late and we have all kind of problems. So let's talk about how we're supposed to walk. What's the correct walking pattern? And so the first point about that is, what muscles are you supposed to use? Well, the correct pattern uses your glute muscles. Those are the ones you sit on, the hamstring muscles behind your upper legs there, and then the lower back, what I call the QL. If you're using that correct pattern, you're going to walk more efficiently, okay? You're going to be a better hiker. You're going to be better at almost everything that you do. And you're going to have less knee pain as well. So how do you do that? Well, it starts with, again, engaging the big toe. Here's that big toe thing again. If we learn to use the big toe and as we're walking or hiking, you will engage. You will get those glutes to start to fire properly, okay? Because when you're walking, you shouldn't feel anything in your knees if you're walking properly. I like to call it the glide. When you're walking along, and you'll notice some people that out on the hiking trails or just walking, they almost look like they're gliding because they're using their glutes, okay? And so we want to practice that, and that's how you get better at it. So if you're feeling pressure behind your knees or your knees in general, you're probably walking with the wrong pattern. And again, it starts with the big toe. And I don't want you to just walk around on your toes. I want you to walk around thinking about pressing down with the big toe. And that's just going to take practice. This all takes practice. I'm out there sometimes on the trails. People always wondering, what's Coach Arnie doing? He's practicing. He's doing stuff like this, working on my glutes, working on my walking pattern, working on my climbing pattern, working on my pattern for going downhill. But if you want to walk with a better pattern, have more energy, less injuries, you will learn how to use your glutes when you're walking and hiking. I promise you, it works. And again, as usual, if you have any concerns, please just get a hold of me and we can walk your way right through this. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you later.
That's Coach Arnie Fonseca Jr. His contact information in the show notes, and he means it when he says if you need help, reach out. He is the man for the job. Give him a call, give him a text. He is there for you. Thanks again to Davy Crockett for being on the show today. My name is Brian Special, encouraging you, as always, to go hike the canyon. Take that first step. Embrace the journey. And when you get there, whether it's for time goals or taking your time, just hike your own hike and enjoy every step in the magnificent Grand Canyon. We'll see you next time on the Grand Canyon Hiker Dude Show, presented by Bright Angel Outfitters.